things I'm often asked about is how to measure the effectiveness of an employee share ownership plan. And I think there's probably, in my head, 8 sort of key things we can focus on. 5 of them relate to the business and 3 or 4 relate to the employees themselves. But let's just go through them and have a look at what are some of the things you could be or should be measuring to determine the effectiveness of the plan. Now, let me tell you first, the plans work. We know they work. We've got more than 150 of them running. Some of them have been running for 10 and even nearly 20 years in one particular case. But let's look at what you would need to measure to determine success. The first one is really regular employee surveys. Now, you probably did this before you had an employee ownership plan, but surveys and feedback from employees about engagement and satisfaction. I know lots of businesses measure that, and that's something you should continue to do to see how the plan has affected engagement and employee satisfaction. Secondly, some KPIs. We spoke about KPIs and how to design them. They should be tracked and measured. The broader, wider company-based KPIs like profitability and productivity, absolutely, but also some individual KPIs across the business, some of the key areas that the business was hoping to improve. One of those, of course, and the next one I want to talk about is retention rates. If you're not measuring this already, you should be. It's very easy to measure your staff turnover or retention rate on a per annum basis. Our expectation is that will decrease quite a lot, actually quite substantially, after introduction of employee ownership. If it hasn't or it isn't, then we need to do something about that because something's not quite right. So measuring employee retention is important as well. The obvious one is financial performance. Measuring the profitability, the financial stability, the performance of the business should absolutely improve as part of employee ownership, simply because you've now got more people within the business focused on those key measures. Overall performance should improve. Next, we should also see, although it's a little bit harder to measure, an improvement or performance increase in terms of governance and compliance. There's now an understanding in the business of the relationship between risk and valuation, and governance and compliance is partly about reducing risk. It's also about structure and discipline, and those key things will all impact overall business performance, valuation, and effectiveness of the employee share ownership plan. Again, there's a couple more that are harder to measure. Trust and transparency within the business. I talked before about employee engagement and the psychology of ownership, inviting employees into the tent with you as a business owner. That automatically implies a level of trust. You're not likely to invite someone into ownership of the business with you who you don't know, like, and trust. And therefore, measuring that, keeping an eye on that, monitoring that, perhaps through our engagement and satisfaction survey, should give you a good metric around how that's working within the business. Stakeholder confidence. You often see people like banks publishing consumer confidence metrics. You know, the consumer confidence has gone up with inflation, or it's gone down with interest rates, or it's changed, based on some metric. We can also measure our stakeholder confidence. What are our employees feeling about the future prospects of the business and why? And that might be, again, part of our employee engagement or satisfaction survey, but it does give us a good indicator of how employees are feeling and what they're looking forward to or they're worried about in terms of future confidence. And then lastly, I think it's really important to continue to measure engagement. And engagement can be measured through surveys, and we've often talked about those small micro survey tools where you can just get a feeling for what's the attitude. I know that when we did some work earlier this year with Colonial, their CFO actually talked about a tool that she was using to survey members of her team, just 2 or 3 short, sharp questions, but on a regular basis every month to get a feel for what are those employees feeling like? What's their engagement like? Are they stressed because we're coming up to the end of the financial year, for example? Or are they feeling really good because we've just completed a major project? So those sort of metrics, I think, are all about how do we measure the effectiveness of the employee ownership plan. There's obviously others as well, but that should give you a broad range of things you can look at, measure, and sort of monitor going forward as well to make sure the employee ownership plan is working effectively and has been successful for your business.